Hello, everyone, and welcome to this edition of The Chocolate Life Live. My name's Clay Gordon, and I'm the creator and the host and moderator of TheChocolateLife.com. And I want to say it's good to be back. I have been away from The Chocolate Life Live for about 6 weeks. First, because I caught COVID at the Fancy Food Show here in New York City in mid-June. And then I was traveling for most of the month of July. And it is because of the traveling that I have been doing in the month of July that is the reason why I'm here today giving the presentation that I am giving. And I'm going to be talking about the international markets for cacao fino. Before we do that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to give everybody just sort of a quick update on TheChocolateLife.com. So here is the current homepage for The Chocolate Life. You can see that we've got this presentation going. And the reason why this post on this presentation is really important is if you go to the post itself, what you can do is you can see that you can go to this post where I have uploaded the presentations. And so if what you want to do is you want to have a copy of the presentation, so this Market Cacao Fino presentation with notes, you can download it and you can take a look at it after this presentation. So you don't really need to pay really close attention to what you're seeing on the screen. Obviously, it's good that if you do, but you can always download it and take a look at the numbers in detail and at your leisure. I'd also like to point out that if you're watching live, that you have the opportunity to add live comments into the stream. So if you're watching on YouTube, you can go to chat. If you're watching on Facebook or LinkedIn, you can go to the comment stream for the post that's there and put your comment in. And what I can do is I can get it up on the screen. So I want to thank the good people at Blue Spruce Chocolate in Colorado for joining us today. They've been regular watchers, and I'm really happy that they are joining me today. And again, thank you very much, everybody who's been a supporter. If I were to show a little banner here, that I will let you know that today's sponsor is The Chocolate Life. And if you have an opportunity to support what it is that I'm doing, there's always a free tier membership. You can join us, but I know that dollars are hard to come by in this day and age. So you have an opportunity, click the join link, and there are both monthly and annual subscriptions to The Chocolate Life that you can join and support the broader work that I am doing. All right, having got through all of that, what I want to do is jump really quickly into today's presentation, which are about the markets for fine cocoa. So at any point, if you're watching, what you'd like to do is you'd like to ask a question about anything that's here, please go ahead and ask your question. Let me know what your thoughts are. And so this is a presentation that I gave during my recent trip to Brazil for Chocolate Bahia in Ilhéus. This was, it's hard to imagine that it's less than 2 weeks ago now. And I was there at Chocolate Bahia as a guest of the organizers. I'm working with them to help organize the international guest list and representation. So who are going to be invited internationally to represent the community to help grow the awareness and understanding of the international community for Brazilian cacao farmers and chocolate makers who do not travel internationally, but also to get international chocolate makers, cacao buyers more interested and to give them a better understanding what Brazilian cacao and chocolate are all alike. So I will also want to say that my co-presenter and for this particular presentation was a gentleman by the name of Rob Williamson. Rob is somebody who's been working in cacao in Brazil for a decade or so. He's got a business based out of Sao Paulo called HB Consultoria. And we know each other through the Chocolate Life, and we came together to be able to put the background for this presentation, as well as to present it live to the audience. Rob may be joining us today. I hope that he does and signs in and lets us know that he's there, because there's a good deal of nuance and understanding that came from Rob, and I want to acknowledge that. So, number one. What we wanted to do, we wanted to start off by giving a geographical representation of just cocoa production in general. And this is, I believe, ICO numbers for 2020. And it says that Brazil is the 7th largest producer in the world. It produces about 4% of the world's production. But this is a geographical distribution. What we see is that, Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire, right, are in fact the largest producers over here. And we find that Cameroon and Ecuador, and this is something that all of us should know. But what we wanted to do was we wanted to present the data in a number of different ways to talk about some of the challenges associated with really diving deep into the numbers. And so this first look at the geographic distribution is really, really important. We find that the 4 largest producers, Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, Cameroon, and Nigeria, producing 90 some odd percent of the world's cocoa. Among them, occupy far smaller territory than the entire country of Brazil. So, even though these are small countries, they're giants in terms of production. But this also gets an idea about what the geographic spread is. I had a conversation with somebody who's in Indonesia, and I'm hoping in the next couple of weeks we're going to actually have a chance to talk about Indonesian cocoa specifically. I'm looking forward to that. So the varieties that exist there and sort of the geographic distribution, because you can see from Indonesia that it's spread all over the place, which talks about geographic diversity. So the next thing the next slide in the presentation, dives into, okay, we're going to take sort of the geographic data, and what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to put together in a spreadsheet format. And here's where it becomes really, really important to understand that I could not find 2 sets of numbers that agreed on anything. And as a matter of fact, what I did is I take a look at the 2016 numbers and the 2019 numbers in this table. Both come from the International Executive Service Corps project, the Global Cocoa Study in 2021. And from my understanding, it's a meta-analysis. It's a look at a bunch of different sources. And what they do is they come up with what they think is the best representation for what cocoa production was. So they're looking at ICCO numbers, the International Cocoa Organization. They're looking at individual country statistics. They might be looking at the FAO numbers. So the Federal Agricultural Organization, which maintains a database of agricultural production going back 40 years or thereabouts. And the reason why you see I have the FAO numbers from 2006 is I don't actually have the FAO numbers from 2019. They haven't been presented yet. I only have them from 2017. And so one of my challenges is I want to create a set of numbers where I can compare them, where the methodology for grabbing them is in fact the same methodology. And so that's why we find the FAO numbers in 2006, right? But we have the IESC, USDA numbers for 2016 and 2019. And this, we see that Ivory Coast, Ghana, Indonesia, Nigeria, Ecuador, Cameroon, these are the top 6 countries that we saw on the previous slide. So we're just taking these broad, high-level information, and we're diving down into what this means in terms of actual production. And it should be kept in mind that this is total production. It's not the production of cacao fino. It's not the production of fine and flavor cocoa, whatever it is that you want to call it. This is global cocoa production statistics. And so what we see here is that the reported number here, so Brazil reported, this is the number that I get from FAO Stat in 2006, 212,000 metric tons. This is the number that I got from the IESC USDA study in 2016, 213,000 metric tons. And then I've got 259,000 metric tons for the IESC study in 2019. And this number out here on the right is the percentage increase or decrease between the 2016 and 2019 numbers. Now, Rob has been involved in the cacao industry in Brazil. And so what he has is he has access to actual numbers within Brazil that are reported by a group called the AIPC, which is the Association of Industrial Chocolate Producers. So Cargill, as you might say in Portuguese, Berry or Berry Calabout. So it is an organization that's representing the larger chocolate manufacturers. And Thomas Hartmann, who is in fact a very well-known, very highly respected commentator on the cocoa industry in Brazil. And so the numbers that are in this Brazil actual, right, show that the IESC USDA study is considerably overreporting what Brazil thinks that it is producing. So instead of 213,000 metric tons in 2016, they produced 153,000 metric tons. And instead of 259,000 metric tons in 2019, it was 178,000 metric tons. And this is really important to understand, is that if you're pulling numbers from a number of different sources, right, then it becomes impossible to be able to compare apples to apples. So one might say, okay, Clay, how come you couldn't get the equivalent of the AIPC numbers in every single one of these countries? Because it would have meant that I would have had to find the equivalent of AIPC in every single one of these producing countries. And I would have had to make that contact. They would have been open to sharing those numbers with me for the years that I was interested in. So they would have had to have the data that were available for those years, and they would have been willing to share for me. And it turns out that what I did was I relied on the IESC Global Cocoa Study to do that work for me. And it turns out that there's a disconnect. And this is a challenge. And I don't know why the disconnect exists, and I don't know where the disconnect exists. Is it in the methodology that was used to collect the numbers? Is it because the numbers are actually gathered very, very differently between what the FAO stat says, what ICCO says, what the government of the country involved says? It's impossible to know if there is, in fact, a systematic bias anywhere in the numbers. But man, is it really a challenge to figure out what global cocoa production stats are. I do want to say something that was interesting is that every 5 years, ICCO gets together and makes a determination about what portion of exports of countries is represented by a fine and flavor of cocoa. And what we can do is we can see that between the 2020 and 2015 reports, we can see the change. So Indonesia in 2020, 10% of the cocoa that was exported, not 10% of the cocoa that was produced, but 10% of the cocoa that was exported was considered to be cacao fino. Now, again, one of the challenges here is that these numbers, right, are production numbers. So 656,817 metric tons in 2016 is the amount harvested. It doesn't actually reflect the amount that is exported. And so one of the challenges that we have is we actually don't know what this 10% represents, how much volume is represented by these numbers. All we know is that 10% of cocoa exported, right, is considered to be fine in flavor. And what's really cool about that is that this went up from 1% of cocoa exported in 2015. So for the other countries in this top 10 who are exporting any fine and flavor cocoa, we find that Ecuador in 2020 had 75% of their cocoa was considered to be fine flavor, cocoa exports considered to be fine flavor, but that was no change from 2015. The same is for Peru, 75% of exports are fine flavor, but no change from 2015. For Colombia, 95% of exports are cacao fino, but no change. So you take a look at what this means. But Brazil, right, was 100% of their exports were considered to be cacao fino in 2020, whereas none of them were considered to be fine cocoa in 2015. And if you look closely at the reason for why this is the case, it turns out that Brazil was not a member of the International Cocoa Organization in 2015. And so prior to their becoming a member, they would not actually be asked to report on how much of their cocoa exports were cacao fino. And so we don't know that in 2015, 0% of the exports were actually cacao fino. It's just that this is what ICO reports after Brazil became a member of the organization. What is unusual is that we actually know through the reports, which are generated by the AIPC in Brazil and which were shared with me by a number of different people, representatives of the AIPC and Rob Williamson in particular, that we know that the total exports, right, of cacao from Brazil in 2020 were 2021 were 635 metric tons. So of all the cacao that was produced, 179,000 metric tons, 635 metric tons were exported. And of the cacao that was exported in 2021, 100% of it could be considered fine flavor cocoa. So, I mean, that represents movement in a very, very interesting direction. Again, we look at 635 metric tons out of 178,000. I don't have the 2021 numbers for total production in Brazil, so I can't do a real comparison. But you get an idea about the direction that cacao production in Brazil is moving. So what I want to do, right? I want to make sure I'm in the right slide. What I want to do is I want to look, and this is a table that Rob put together for me, and it's based on his resources, and it compares some ICO numbers with some AIPC and Thomas Hartman numbers. And what we're doing is we're doing a deep dive into Brazilian fine cocoa production. And the reason why we're doing Brazil here is obviously we're making the presentation in Brazil, and I have access to the numbers from experts in Brazil. And so what we do is in 2020, right, important, what we do is we see that the total production of commodity or bulk cocoa beans was 1.9 million metric tons. Brazil, right, produced 168,000 metric tons, which means that Brazil represented 9% of the world's cocoa beans, commodity cocoa beans. So type 1 is within the commodity bulk / commodity market. It's a slightly higher grade, so fewer defects. And so what we do is we see that 237,000 globally, right? Brazil is producing 10,000 tons, which is 4% of the world's supply of type 1 beans. So what's interesting to me is that the number of beans that were harvested in 2020 in the world, 40% of them had some sort of certification. So that is a Rainforest Alliance / UTZ certification or some other fair trade certification. It might be organic certification. It could be Demeter, which is a biodynamic certification. So any form of certification, right, that 1.9 million metric tons. So 40% of the world supply, but an amount that is equal to basically bulk and commodity cocoa. So equal distribution of certified cocoa. And for me, that's just really a fascinating topic. We do is we find that Brazil produced 16,000 metric tons of certified cocoa. My guess is most of it organic. I don't see a lot of fair trade certified cocoa in Brazil. But representing 1% of the world's supply. Now, of this 1.9 million metric tons, 237,000 of it is certified organic, which means that roughly 1.6 million metric tons has something other than an organic certification. But that could be kosher, it could be halal. I mean, it is just the entire gamut of certifications that are out there. And again, we see roughly what Brazil produces, 2,000 metric tons of organic, again, a relatively small proportion of what the world is producing. Now, the global production is 190,000 metric tons. And I don't understand this distribution. If we look at the difference between specialty cocoa and cacao fino, the fact that cacao fino is more than specialty cocoa is a little hard for me to understand how that happens. I don't know the specific definition, especially within Brazil, for what this means. And again, this just highlights one of the major challenges that I have about trying to come up with these statistics, is that every country reports the numbers using a different methodology. There's a different definition. And when you have to go to multiple sources for this information, what you find out is that you need to what are called harmonize. You need to be able to say, oh, everybody's got their own definition. So there are different definitions. I need to be able to regularize them. I need to be able to put things into categories in which what I'm actually doing is end up comparing apples to apples and origins to origins, or Forastero to Forastero and Criollo to Criollo. It's a real challenge in order to be able to do this. And here's a really, really good example, because if we go back to the IESC study, right? What we do is that what they've done is they've done a breakdown of the world's cocoa production. And so where we see that in this study from Brazil that Rob sent me, what we do is we see that roughly 40 plus 45%, so 85% of the market is considered to be bulk and commodity cocoa. And we see that 40% is considered to be certified, of which 5% is organic. If we come into this study, right, what we find is that the IESS study says that commodity or bulk cocoa, mainstream cocoa, we might talk it, represents 80% of the world's supply of cocoa in 2021. Right now, one of the characteristics of this cocoa is it tends to be traded on the New York and London exchanges. It's probably, especially if it comes from West Africa, it will be traded under the terms of the Federation of Cocoa Commerce, which is based out of London. And there are very, very specific rules about how the cocoa gets packed into containers, and what are the rights and responsibilities of the various players in the transaction. So what the IESC study has said is, on top of commodity, bulk, and mainstream cocoa, there is a price tier, right, which is this bulk mainstream cocoa, which is also certified, right? So this represents 15% of the market, which is really hard to square with this 40% is certified. And I don't know how to do that because I don't have access to the underlying numbers. I don't have access to the underlying methodology. And again, a challenge. So one of the reasons why I chose the IESC USDA study is, number one, it was public. There's a really long documentation for what it is that they've done. And I was able to use a sort of an overarching methodology. And I can point to it. With these private studies, again, I don't know where the numbers come from. I don't know how the numbers were compiled. I don't know how they were normalized and regularized and put together in the table. But again, it's a huge difference. I mean, there is a similarity, 40%, 80% of the market, fits into here, 15%, but that's really, really different. Now, if this is certified as only organic, but we have 5% organic. I mean, again, just a real challenging task. It's a real challenging problem to try to understand exactly what it is that's going on. I personally don't believe there's enough research which is done on this. I personally believe that there are a lot of sort of entrenched interests. So governments don't want to talk about numbers in particular ways. I don't know that ICO, I think they're wedded to a particular methodology, and I don't necessarily know when that methodology was last updated. And so I don't know what their numbers look like. And so, yeah. And, again, if you're out there watching, you're here live, you have a question, please put it in the comments. Be happy to get the question up on the screen and to be able to share it with everybody that's here so we can get your questions answered. I will do the best that I possibly can. So it turns out this commodity bulk and mainstream market is publicly traded. So it's on the exchanges in New York and London. If we look at this mainstream certified, I'm prepared to believe that some percentage of that cocoa is in fact privately traded. So the buyer and the seller, whether that's a broker or it is a cooperative or someone else, that that those transactions are not necessarily reported the same way that the exchanges report. What is this going on? So, for example, we have Coapacoco and their relationship with Divine. I know it's not huge amounts of cocoa, but I don't necessarily know that how those are reported to the government of Ghana, how they fit within the certified, because it's both fair trade. And it might be more than one fair trade certification. I don't know how much of it is organic. I mean, it's overlapping, just really, really hard to understand. What we can say is that these two bits of these two markets, commodity, bulk, and mainstream and certified, fall into what we might think of as industrial chocolate, or what I prefer to as confectionery chocolate. Chocolate is used in candy making, for example. Is that roughly 95% of the market fits into this category, according to the IESC USDA study, right? Global Cocoa Market Study. What that says is that the premium market, right, represents roughly 5% of the market. And in 2021, I believe that the total harvest was around 5 million metric tons, which makes this 5% about 250,000, 200, is that right? 5 million, 10% is 500,000, 5% is 250,000. Yeah. So it's about 250,000 metric tons. And so premium, so we have this notion of certified. So we can find out that premium and premium certified FOB price, so price at the port of export, is going to be somewhere between $3.50 and $6 a kilogram. Certification is included in that price. And normally what we're doing when we're talking about premium and premium certified is we're talking about a cocoa. So this might include, and I guess it would have to include what is in this table, what is called both, which is the specialty market. So 190,000 metric tons. So yeah, I mean, that's where it exists. These numbers seem to be about right. But then we get into the ultra premium. And here's where we have sort of definitions problems again. I think that specialty and ultra premium in the IESC study are based on price and not necessarily on the flavor characteristics or the genetic or varietal characteristics or the information we have about the beans. And so this is focusing specifically on price. It's not focusing on, is it Criollo or is it Trinitario? And I happen to think that this is where some of that differentiation is going to be. But keep in mind, ultra premium is defined in the IES study as anything which gets an FOB price of over $6 a kilogram. And so that is a price at the port of export normally of $6 a kilogram. This is not the farm gate price. So it's really, really important to understand is that the farm gate price, as let's take Ghana as an example. The farm gate price is about 40% of whatever the market price is at any given time. That 40% differential goes to the COCOBOD, which is the organization that in Ghana is responsible for overseeing all cocoa production. So they are the legal buyer. They're the only legal buyer. They're the only legal seller. They're the only organization that can set the price on the cocoa legally. And it's to the point where if I'm a cacao grower, if I want to legally also be a chocolate maker, I need to sell my cocoa beans to the government and then buy them back at a higher price. I just can't. Without special government permits, I can't actually just use the cocoa that I grow on my own farm to make chocolate, at least not legally. But this FOB price that we see here is the price at the port of export generally, not at the farm gate. So, one of the challenges again overall is, we don't know what the value of the cocoa is to the farmer that fits in any of these categories, right? Where the Brazil study, right, and the IESC study differ is that what is the total size of the market for ultra premium cocoa. So we're going to call it cacao fino. We're going to talk about at the upper end of cacao fino, the upper end of specialty cocoa. So it is going to be criollos. It is going to be trinitarios from very, very specific origins. Maybe it has an experimental or other kind of fermentation associated with it. It might have won an award. It might be in the Heirloom Cacao Preservation Project at Cocoa of Excellence. There might be something special about it. Or it could be an origin from a producing country that has a certain sort of almost legendary status. So if that makes me think of Chuao from Venezuela, Porcelanas from Venezuela, maybe the Cacao Gran Blanco from Piura in northern Peru. It might be some beans from Madagascar. I mean, you get the idea. But what is really important to understand here is that the total market for cacao fino globally, this specialty cocoa that commands an FOB price of over $6 a kilogram, is 20,000 metric tons. I mean, and that's being generous, according to everybody that I've talked with about this over the past couple of years. And this includes small specialty brokers, as well as farmers and chocolate makers. This is what the number is. And 20,000 metric tons, if we're talking about long containers, which are 25 metric tons a piece. So that's 40 containers per 1,000 metric tons. I mean, it's not a whole lot of containers of cocoa going around the world that fit into this ultra premium category. Part of the challenge is, man, all of the transactions are private transactions. So, we'll just take, Uncommon as an example. So Uncommon will say, this is what we purchase from a farm, but we don't know who's buying from Uncommon, and we don't know the price that they're paying. They give a price range that people are paying for them, but we don't necessarily know the price. We can look at other companies. Dandelion mentions that they purchase some of their cocoa from Uncommon, and so we can work backwards by comparing the Dandelion sourcing report with the Uncommon transparency report, and we can get an idea about what things are being paid and what kind of, what prices are being paid and how much quantity, what the quantities involved are. But it requires an enormous amount of sleuthing. There is no international standard for the way transparency reports or sourcing reports or impact reports are organized. There's no international standard for the kind of data which needs to be included in those reports and how that data is gathered and presented, making all of this just incredibly difficult and incredibly frustrating. But it's important to know that, generously speaking, ultra premium cocoa, anything that gets over $6 a kilogram, right, represents a very small percentage of the market. So we're talking about 0.1%, something like that, right? Right. The challenge of gathering statistics is that virtually all of the transactions are private transactions, but everything that's sitting here, I would guess that almost all of this 20,000 metric tons fits within what we would call the craft and specialty market. Okay. So yeah, why is this a problem, right? Number one is that there are a lot of companies, right? They could be non-governmental organizations. They might be private companies. They could be cooperatives, or some combination of those three, that are focused on increasing the quality of the cocoa that they produce. And as we've had many discussions, the idea of quality is a very nebulous concept. There is no absolute objective definition for what quality is. What I might think of as quality, and a confectionery / industrial chocolate maker would say, no, that's not my definition of quality. And so we need to be careful when we talk about producing a higher quality cocoa and assuming that just because we produce a higher quality cocoa, that the market will automatically pay more for it. And part of that is that this market is so small, and this market, so this is 250,000 metric tons, more or less. I was involved in a project. I was working with some people trying to put together a project in Colombia. And what they wanted to do is they wanted to produce 50,000 metric tons of cocoa. And they wanted to be able to sell that cocoa for between $5 and $6 a kilo. So again, FOB price. And that fits into this specialty category area. But trying to say, well, if the global market for this kind of cocoa is currently 250,000 metric tons, why do we think that there is room in the market for another 50,000 tons? And Colombia is not necessarily considered to be the fine flavor origin. I mean, although if we take a look at this, we see that Colombia is known, 95% of the cocoa that is exported is considered to be cacao fino, and there are a number of wonderful brands that use Colombian cocoa. The challenge is, why do we think that growing another 50,000 tons of cocoa is something that the market is going to accept? And the answer is, it makes no sense whatsoever to think about that. Right? And how do we grow this share of the marketplace? Right? And this is something that I've talked about on a number of different live streams, part of my talk at Chocoa this past year, and part of the presentation moving forward is that in order to grow this number, it's not just enough to grow the number of chocolate makers that are out there, and that growth has been explosive. When we take a look at the number of chocolate makers that now exist, so craft or specialty chocolate makers that exist in the world today, my personal feelings, sort of based anecdotally on what I see in my Instagram feed and on Facebook and other kinds of things like that, other sources of information like that, the numbers are probably more than 2,500 globally. Growing from like 1 in 1996 and maybe 10 in 2006. That, depending on how you define specialty chocolate. It's not enough just to grow the number of makers. What we need to do is we need to grow the number of consumers, right? So we need to be able to say, rather than trying to say, okay, how can I get the same number of consumers to buy twice as much chocolate as they're currently buying? What we need to do is we need to find, how do we grow the number of people who are buying chocolate by a factor of 2 or 4 or 5 or 10, right? And by growing the number of consumers, what will happen is that chocolate makers will purchase more beans to be able to meet that demand, right? And this is a fundamental challenge. Not everybody in the world is focused on buying a lot of 70% two-ingredient chocolate. What we need is a great deal more diversity in terms of the products that are made to appeal to a wider audience. And by appealing to a wider audience, what we can do is we can grow the amount of specialty cocoa that is purchased to be able to meet the growing demand. But we're not going to get there by trying to figure out how to only grow the number of consumers in a very, very slow rate, but sell them more chocolate or more chocolate and more products on a regular basis. And so, yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the reality, and it is sort of a challenge, right, for specialty and craft chocolate around the world, however you define them. And I'm going to go and do a live stream in a little while about those topics more specifically. But this 20,000 metric ton number is one that needs to be looked at very, very closely in order to be able to understand the reality which exists for craft and specialty chocolate makers. I mean, if we look at those 2,500 makers, a big one. So if we take an established company, and maybe you would not include Bona in this list, but as far as I'm concerned, they're the OG single origin chocolate maker in the modern era, making and marketing the first single origin chocolate in modern times back in 1984. I don't know where Scharfenberger is these days in terms of how much chocolate they produce. I mean, Hershey spun them off. I think they've gone private again. And so I don't know where they are in terms of their production. I mean, if you look at Dandelion sourcing reports, 2020, 2021 was around 100 metric tons. I don't know actually if they're processing all of that or how much of it they're selling to other people. But very, very quickly, once you get out of the top tier of makers, the average amount of cocoa that the average craft chocolate maker uses is relatively small, and the number of different origins that they work with is relatively high. And so for many craft chocolate makers, if you want to pick up a new origin, what you need to do is you whether it's from within the same producing country or another producing country, what you probably are doing is you're dropping another origin. And so this competition represents another very, very difficult hurdle to overcome. But I do want to say that I am just incredibly impressed with what it is that Brazil has managed to achieve over the past 5 years. I mean, I was there for the first time in 2017. I have a memory of not liking a lot of the chocolate. There were, absolutely some standouts, but in general, my impression was that it was fairly low, that there was a flavor that I associate, a sort of a mineral, earthy kind of flavor, which might have come from particular varieties that the government agricultural research institute, SLAPLAC, had put together to try to overcome the witch's broom, the introduction of witch's broom in the late 1980s to grow production volume. So Brazil is a net importer of cocoa, even though they're producing 178,000 metric tons. They import at least another 20,000 metric tons, although it could be 60,000. I don't necessarily know that I remember exactly, from Ghana. And it's the only origin, if I recall correctly, that they're legally allowed to import from. All these beans come into the port of Ilhéus only. One of the disadvantages that you might think that a Brazilian craft chocolate maker has is that the only origin they can work with is Brazil. But I got to tell you, man, not only has the quality of the chocolate that I tasted in this last trip just improved remarkably from when I was there 5 years ago, and even from when I was there 2 years ago in Sao Paulo for Chocolate São Paulo in 2020, the quality of cacao and the quality of chocolate has just improved enormously. And I'm going to be doing a tasting this coming Friday, so I'm not gonna actually do the tasting today, but I'm letting people know about it. Is that one of the makers that is sort of at the forefront of showcasing all these Brazilian cacao growers is Casa Lascivicius, so Bruno Lascivicius in Sao Paulo. And what we have here is a selection of 6 different chocolate bars. These chocolate bars, each one of them is made from a different cacao from a different winner of the 2020 the national contest, Concurso Nacional de Qualidade de Cacao in Brazil. So we have, first place in the varietal category from Fazenda Guarani in Linhares and Espírito Santo. Second place in the varietal category, José Luis Fagundes in Igrapiúna in Bahia. My Portuguese pronunciation is getting better. I apologize if I didn't get it quite right. We have Alexandra Magalhães with Zendo Ouro Verde, with a farm that I have visited. So third place in the Mistura mixed category, I believe. So Fazenda Panorama from Ururá in Panama. So second place, first place in the experimental fermentation, or not experimental fermentation, but the experimental variety by Cristian Ferreira in Metacelandia, also in Pará, not far from Altamira, where I was a couple of weeks ago. And then a first place from Linhares, Espírito Santo, Fernando Buffon. So, I mean, just from one maker, here are 6 different bars from 6 different award-winning cacaos in Brazil. And you can go to his website or call them up and you get this. Well, if you are in Brazil, you can do this. I don't think this stuff is generally available outside Brazil. And then another one here is a blend of award winners, Blend dos Premiados. And I will be tasting these this coming Friday. So in addition to that, what we've found, this is something that I saw when I was in Sao Paulo after my trip to Pará, which is when I visited the factory of Casa Lascivicius. So here are 2 chocolates. They are identified with a specific area. So Turua Tuere, which is in the Amazon rainforest. So the Bioma Floresta Amazonica, as it is called. And we have a winner here, João Evangelista, and also a Valdomiro. And what's really fun about those, let's jump over here, is that the beans from João Evangelista won a second prize, silver prize, in the most recent Cocoa of Excellence Awards. And, global recognition for what it is that they're doing. Valdomiro is not on that list, but it's really interesting that of the 10 awards that were given to South American producers, 3 of them, 1 gold, 1 and 2 silvers, were from cows from Brazil. So if you have been sitting on the fence wondering, hey, I really am not sure if I want to think about Brazil as an origin because, it's got a bad reputation and I haven't heard much about it. And, I don't know how to get at it. Or I got to tell you that, you should run, not walk, and think about Brazil as a producing country, adding it to your origin because of the specificity. And the reason why I mention that is that, going back to Chocoa, and talking about marketing craft chocolate, and the panel I was on with Spencer Hyman of Cocoa Runners and other people talking about what it is that craft chocolate can do that no one else can do, is here we have a specific origin. So we're talking about a specific place. So not Brazil, right, but Pará. We have a specific farmer that we can speak to. It's not listed on here, but we can get to specific varietals. And so we can engage the consumer in ways that big chocolate cannot engage them. We can go directly down to the farm or farmer level. And that's what's interesting about this, is that there's a lot of work being done in Brazil to support the farmers and to be able to help farmers export their cocoa. And if this is something that interests you, it is a project that I am now engaged in working with Rob Williamson, who has been working with farmers around Brazil for the last decade, again, partly with Cargill, but most recently engaging as an independent consultant and broker. So if you're looking for sourcing for Brazilian cocoa, please get in contact with me. And I will put you in touch with Rob, and we can start the process of finding the cocoa for you. And if you've never thought about it, you should consider going to Brazil. And I can recommend going to these chocolate festivals that are organized by the group that I'm working with. The next one, then there's one in Linhares, Espírito Santo, at the end of this month. If you're in the United States, you need a Brazilian visa. It will take you a while to get a Brazilian visa. The reason why you need a Brazilian visa, a tourist visa, is that we require Brazilians to have visas to come to the United States. If you're from the European Union or other parts of the world, you may or may not need a tourist visa. But Espírito Santo is at the end of August. The next one is in Belém, which is at the end of September. And Belém is in the state of Pará. Pará and Bahia are the 2 biggest producing states in Brazil. And there's just a lot of great variety, and the food is simply amazing. I've got a restaurant recommendation for you in Belém if you want to go and do that. So we have Juan Gonzalez, who is saying that Brazil is always in his eye, and a few farms that I do the evaluation on Brazilian cocoa beans. So yeah, no, absolutely, Juan, it's great. And if there is any help that you need or anything like that, please let me know, and I will do my best to help you. And that may also be logistics. I know somebody who wants to bring 4 metric tons of cocoa into the United States between now and the end of the year. Maybe what we can do is we can, work together to be able to consign cocoa that you're interested in with cocoa that they're interested in, and reduce shipping costs or something like that. So we're open to all sorts of activities that would be able to move this along. So I also want to show another image, which is this one. And so this is the Cocoa of Excellence. So here we see the list of winners. Right here we see the 2 Brazilian winners two of the Brazilian winners. Here's one from Ilhéus, which is where I was 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago, however long ago it was, I don't remember. And here we have Uruçuca. And if you follow my photo blog on this, so there's a photo blog which I talk about the festival. The places that I visited were along this road, 262. So Bahia 262 between Ilhéus on their way to Uruçuca. So we talk about Fazenda Bonança and Fazenda Capela Velha, two farms that I visited while I was there. They're along this road. So, take a look at these. The Cocoa of Excellence references here. You'll find out who won. You'll find out where they're located. You can get an idea. And now what you can do is you can cross-correlate some of that information with where the cocoa is grown and how much of it is grown, and lots of background information that hopefully I've been able to provide for you today. But think about the fact that if you are a cocoa grower, this is the market that you are selling into, right? There's an enormous amount of competition. Everybody, every cocoa growing country in the world, bar perhaps the 4 largest cocoa growing countries in the world, but certainly from Indonesia. So let's take a look at some of these countries. So from Indonesia, who's the 6th largest producer, so and Ecuador, which is the other South American company. Ecuador, a country, Ecuador, Indonesia, Brazil, Peru. I mean, all of these producing countries are looking to grow the share of cacao fino. And the feeling being that if they produce, quote unquote, a higher quality cocoa, that what is going to happen is they're going to be able to get a better price for it. And the challenge is they're selling into a very, very, very small market. So if you are a cacao grower, right, this is one of the fundamental challenges, is how do we as a community, how does the craft chocolate world grow the amount of chocolate that we make to appeal to a wider number of consumers so that we can purchase more cocoa and grow this roughly 0.5% number or less into something which is significantly larger. Before we leave today, another 10 minutes or so before we leave Brazil, just a couple more Brazilian chocolates. And I want to give a shout out to colleagues of mine, friends, people who have visited me, people who I've visited, people who've hosted me and over the course of my trips there recently. The first one of which is I just had a fabulous time visiting Fazenda Bonança. So there is in my photo blog, a short discussion of my trip to Fazenda Bonança, owned by Rogério Camé and his wife Claudia Gamba. It's been in the Camé family for 50, 70 years. The Fazenda, it is an estate holder farm in the sense that it's owned by a family and it's hired workers on the farm. But one of the things that I showed, I believe there's a picture of one of my favorite things to do when I'm on a farm, which is open up a bunch of different varieties of cocoa and taste the pulp. And so here's the before and after. Here's a bunch of different varieties, including a Parazinha. So this is an Amelinado Forastero. This is what is grown in West Africa for the most part, or this was what transplanted to West Africa, again, a couple hundred years later. And this is what it looks like. I don't think there's a Katongo pod in here, but there is some Katongo here. And I'm looking forward to it. The Katongo isn't albino. It's a 100% white Forastero. Right, so people think of cacao blanco, think of a white bean cacao. It must be a porcelana. It must be criollo. The answer is absolutely not. There are albino forasteros. As a matter of fact, white beans are a recessive characteristic in all bean populations, and that 100% white beans, right, in criollos were in fact bred from this. So the idea was, how do we increase the percentage of all white beans? And that's done by selective breeding over the course, perhaps of hundreds of years. So on Friday, we will be tasting this Katongo, which is interesting. Also, this Trinitario, which is a 75%. One of the varieties which is on the table, unfortunately, I don't remember which one it is based on, is a variety called Bien or Boa Nova 34. And so this Trinitario is in fact Boa Nova 34. And I can tell you that, man, the pulp, it was one of my favorite tasting pulps of the entire day. It was just really, really wonderful. Delicately floral, sweet, fruity, great to smell, great to taste. I'm hoping that my memory of those flavors in the pulp will find themselves into this bar. I also had the opportunity on my first trip, so coming back from Pará, to be able to visit the new factory of Luisa Abram. I saw her factory for the first time in 2017 when I was there. She's grown hugely. It's really quite remarkable. But here is a wild cacao from the Amazonica. This is from Pará, and it is along the river Juruá. So, yeah, I mean, Luisa is probably best known outside of Brazil for focusing on the wild cacaos, the cacao selvagem, which are grown in the Trans-Amazonica region. And so I'm looking forward to seeing that one. There's another expression, I believe, of that. So here is a bar from Arcelia Gallardo and Mission Chocolate. It's called Two Rivers, or Dois Rios. People may remember that Zélia Frangione, who is the organizer of the Prêmio Vinho Bar Brazil, and is also the head, writes the TheChocolateLife blog, wrote an article about this particular bar. So I'm looking forward to it. One of the beans in this bar, I believe, comes from Juruá. And so I'm interested in being able to, I don't know which one, but I'm interested in comparing the two of them and seeing how they are different. And then, from Mission, again, Arcelia is a fabulous host, and is a great chocolate maker. One of the best known names in Brazilian chocolate outside of Brazil, one of the best known names, and got her start, I believe, at Dandelion. One of the things I'm looking forward to is here's a wild Brazilian bar that she makes. I'm not aware of the specific origin. It says wild cacao from the Brazilian rainforest. And then there's another one, which is wild Bolivia. And so I believe this comes from the Beni. It might be Alto Beni, as opposed to the beans from the Hacienda Tranquilidad, which is in the Antennes, which is near the Bolivian border. That would be Volker Lehmann's Hacienda Tranquilidad. So, however, it is believed that the wild Bolivian beans that are found on Hacienda Tranquilidad, it is believed that the beans that are found in the chocolatales in this area of the Antennes were in fact transplanted from Brazil about 300 years ago. And so, obviously, because they're wild, there has been no attempt to do any breeding or figuring out flavor or understanding the genetics and drift and how these things might have hybridized over the course of 300 years when they've been isolated on these small islands. But nonetheless, I'm really, really interested in understanding how the wild Brazil and the wild Bolivia are the same, or are they different. And it's one of the reasons why, guys, Brazilian cocoa is really, really interesting. I've learned a lot in the 2 trips that I've made this year. The differences between cacao paraense, which is cacao from Pará, and cacao which comes from cacao or baiana, which comes from the state of Bahia. Just really, really interesting work. And if you follow this particular photo blog, work being done at Fazenda Capela Velha, or Old Chapel, there's a new fermentation technique called sprouting, which I think is really, really interesting and will deserve a lot of further experimentation. It's a multi-day, so 12 to 15 day, 100% completely anaerobic fermentation that takes place in these light, tight, oxygen-proof drums. It happens at under 40 degrees centigrade, so it is a completely raw, if that's of interest to you, fermentation. Sort of like sous vide. It's, once it reaches conclusion, you can leave it in there for a day or 2 days more, and it really won't, as I've been able to determine, affect the fermentation at all. But what happens is that the beans are in fact very low acidity, very low astringency, and very low bitterness. And are interesting. I have a bag, and I will bring the bag out for Friday and show you what the beans look like and do a tasting of the beans. So that's it. So if we look at the international markets for cocoa and chocolate, or the international market for cacao fino, these are the important numbers to remember, right? In closing, that what we think of as premium cacao, which is anything that gets at the moment over $3.50 a kilo, keeping in mind that cacao is traded internationally. And so on exchanges, and depending upon hedging strategies, depending upon the futures market, depending on a whole lot of factors which are in the control of traders and big chocolate, this $3.50 can move up and down depending upon where the commodity bulk mainstream pricing goes. At the moment, mid 2000s, I believe. I haven't taken a look at it in a couple of weeks because I've been traveling. But keep in mind that this 350, is a floor that can move depending upon what the pricing of commodity and bulk and mainstream cocoa is. But this, right, as near as we can tell, about 5%, or about 250,000 metric tons, represents the entire specialty market, the entire premium cocoa market. 250,000 metric tons. That's all your criollos, all your trinitarios, and all the forasteros that are being harvested and then fermented by people who know what it is that they're doing to produce a very, very high quality cocoa that can produce a very, very high quality chocolate. This is the size of that market. And when we think about cacao fino, again, if what we're looking for is just criollos and a small percentage of the trinitarios, maybe the neo-criollos or criollados that are grown in Nicaragua and then processed by Ingemann, those sorts of regimes. Regime is the wrong word. Under those sorts of circumstances, under those kinds of projects and programs, the total market is 20,000 metric tons. And I actually don't know if all of these 20,000 metric tons are purchased, right, and processed into chocolate. It's just, again, the numbers here are really difficult to suss out and understand. You go to 2 or 3 different people, you get 2 or 3 different numbers. You try to figure out what it is that they mean. And that is a huge challenge. That the craft chocolate community is not aware of itself very much. We don't know exactly how many craft chocolate makers there are. We don't know exactly where they're located. We don't know exactly what beans they're purchasing from, what origins and what producing countries, and what origins within those producing countries. We don't know how much chocolate they're producing. And I think that is a fundamental challenge facing the craft chocolate industry, is a better awareness and understanding of itself in order to be able to go out and promote the value and the impact that this community is having in a way that people will go, oh yeah, I get it. I understand why I should be why I should be willing to pay more for a product made with these specialty beans. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for everybody who's joined me today. Thank you everybody who's added a comment. If you can, give me a like before you leave. And what I am going to be posting sometime in the next 24 hours is the topic for Friday. So there will be a post on the Chocolate Life Live. It's going to be Brazil tasting or something like that. And so, yeah, I'll be here at noon on Friday to have that discussion. On Tuesday next week, my guest will be Sander Wolf. Sander is the organizer of the Dallas Chocolate Festival, which is about a month away, if I recall correctly. And we'll be talking about what's going on at the Dallas Chocolate Festival, who's involved, some of the history, what's going on, what you can expect. I understand there might still be room if you want to exhibit. There's always room if what you want to do is join. Going to Texas in August is not necessarily my favorite thing to do, but Dallas is a really, really fun city. There's some great food, great places to go. And the festival itself is, although it's not as large as the Northwest Chocolate Festival, I think that its size, relatively smaller size, makes it a much more approachable in some respects, and much more interesting and fun festival to go to. And I can recommend, if you've never been to the Dallas Festival, that you go and do so. And if you want to learn more about it, ask questions of Sandra Wolf this coming Tuesday. So the 16th, starting at noon Eastern time, Sandra is going to be my guest here on the Chocolate Life Live. And I'm looking forward to getting back into a regular schedule. I have no travel plans through mid-October or through maybe late September. I'm going back to Ecuador. I know in October, I'm hoping to go back to Brazil for the Belém Festival in late September. I know that I'm going back to Brazil in December for the festival in Sao Paulo. So yeah, I'm hoping to get back into a regular schedule now that I am over the worst of my COVID symptoms and have overcome jet lag, because it was a really, really busy, really, really interesting travel month in the best of July. And with all of that, I can tell you I still have a smile on my face because I really do believe that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. And so until the next time, ciao, ciao, everybody, and enjoy